folks. Hope you guys all had a good lunch. We're going to get into our next panel on the discrimination and legal barriers to accessing long-term care and housing. And we have Christopher Bates, who's going to be our moderator. So I'm going to turn it over to him to get us started.
I like that, no fanfare. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hell, okay, I'll try that again. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hey, I like that. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Christopher Bates. I'm with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of HIV and Infectious Disease Policy. It's a new name for our office now, and I'm just getting used to it. As it's been said, this session this afternoon is on discrimination and legal barriers to accessing long-term care and housing. Boy, it was amazing. You know, last year I turned 60 years old. And it's funny, you know, I lived up until 59 and really didn't think very much about getting older. And now it's staring me in the face. And I'm really happy to be a part of this panel this afternoon to moderate it because I'm here to learn. I'm very concerned about where we are in America as it relates to our community of LGBT folk. And I know as a person who has recently bought property in South Florida in the senior community that it's not easily discernible who's one of my family members there. And I'm very curious about doing that. So I have begun to make some efforts to learn about who is related to me, you know, brothers and sisters by different mothers, if you will. It's really important for us not to be forced back into closets once we become elders. And I'm not sure if we've done a real good job nationally in educating people to the diversity of the American community. And it's going to be important that we start planning now, and I'm glad that the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is taking the lead on having this conversation today with us and letting us help them think about policies and strategies for addressing the issues of getting us into housing and having us in housing in comfortable ways that respect who we are as LGBT people. So without further ado, I'd like to just introduce the members of the panel. Nancy. Okay, because I think people in the back can't see your card, Nancy. Nancy Nat'l is the I. Herman Stern Professor of Law at Temple Law School, where she teaches property and political and civil rights and taxation. She has written and lectured widely on issues related to same-sex relationships and LGBT aging. She has just recently published a book, Gay and Lesbian Elder: History, Law, and Identity Politics in the U.S., that includes practical proposals for reform. Our next panelist is Ken Johnson, a graduate of Harvard Law School. He is a section chief in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Civil Rights Office. Ken supervises a team of civil rights analysts who focus on health disparities, physical accessibility, LGBT issues, and allegations of discrimination in HIV/AIDS treatment and services, as well as TANF and CHIP programs. Ken previously served 9 years as a senior trial attorney in the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Eric Carlson, Eric, is a directing attorney for the National Senior Citizens Law Center. He specializes in consumer protections in nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, and in-home services and supports. He co-counsels impact litigation on behalf of consumers and is the author of the legal treatise Long-Term Care Advocacy and the Consumer Guide, 20 Common Nursing Home Problems and How to Resolve Them. Gina Quantrochi An expert in HIV/AIDS housing, has led her agency since 1991. Gina is a vocal advocate for the rights of people living with HIV and AIDS to permanent housing, access to care, and positive health and mental health outcomes. Gina is a founder and board member of the National AIDS Housing Coalition since 1993 and a steering committee member of the new 30 for 30 campaign, which advocates on behalf of HIV-positive women. Gina would like also for you to know that she will soon be 59. Welcome to the club, Gina, and is looking forward to all of you developing swanky, affordable housing for her and her elder friends. Lori Cook Daniels. Lori has been an active LGBT aging has been active in LGBT aging issues for more than 3 decades. In 1998, she founded the Trans Aging Network, now a partner in the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging. She currently is Policy and Program Director for Forge, a national transgender organization which is headquartered in Milwaukee. And last but not least is Hillary Mayer. She is the AOA-funded director of the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging and Project of Services, an advocate for LGBT elders known as SAGE. Hillary has been in her current position for 14 months, and prior to her work at SAGE, she was the Fair Courts Project Manager at Lambda Legal. Hillary received her bachelor's degree from Colgate University and her JD from Rutgers Law School. That's our panel. Nancy.
Thank you very much, Christopher. And I'd just like to add my voice to those who have been saying how remarkable this gathering is. And I'd like to thank the folks at HUD and HHS, as well as Maya Rupert at NCLR for putting this together. It is so encouraging to see this sort of gathering for a population that, until very recently, has been largely invisible. And although we as a community have put resources, and I think rightly so, toward LGBT youth, we have not dedicated the same energy toward our LGBT elders. And when you think about it, everyone is familiar with those "It Gets Better" videos, right? We have politicians and policymakers and sports figures and celebrities making videos designed to inspire preteens and teens to let them know that it gets better. Well, from the aging perspective, I think we can all say that more truthfully, unless we address the current crisis in LGBT aging, right? Well, you can finish my thought. We all know what those videos should be called. They should be called "It Gets Better," and then it gets a lot worse, right? Potentially a whole lot worse. So what I want to talk about today, really briefly to introduce the panel, is some of the characteristics of the population of LGBT elders that I think really complicate our ability to even craft policy reform or to talk about needs assessments. So if we know that today many of our LGBT elders are isolated from family and community, locked in sort of a fearful silence, some of them are deeply closeted. Right? We have LGBT elders who do not identify as LGBT elders, making the question of outreach challenging, to say the least. So I want to say a couple words briefly about the importance of history, about our need for continued research, empirical data in this area, about existing disparities, about the visceral fear that many of our LGBT elders have that they will experience anti-LGBT bias, and finally, just a couple words about the closet. So first off, let's take a page of history. And when you think about LGBT elders, and by this I mean folks who are 65 and older, that generation has been described as the last generation who spent their adolescence and young adulthood in hiding. Right? They came of age at a time when homosexuality was not just criminalized, but it was classified as a severe sociopathic illness. Today, if you watch Glee, kids are all questioning when are they going to come out, who are they going to tell. There was no coming out for that generation, because to come out even to a best friend or to family was to risk institutionalization. Today's elders who are 65 and older, when the APA finally declassified homosexuality, the youngest of them were 27. They spent the majority of their young adulthood under the stigma of mental illness. What we find is that this history lingers in behaviors. It complicates the relationship that LGBT elders can have with medical professionals. It normalizes the closet as a coping mechanism, and perhaps most insidious of all, it makes some LGBT elders believe that they don't deserve any better, because this is what they were told would happen, right? They were told that if you went down that path, you were going to end up alone, poor, in a one-room occupancy room, and that you were going to die alone and unbefriended. So that many of our LGBT elders are the quintessential unbefriended elder. Now, research, we actually don't know a lot about LGBT elders, although I talk about them all the time as if we did. And the problem is that this just reinforces their invisibility, and there is a desperate need for more information about transgender elders and elders with intersecting identities. With minority LGBT elders, there is just a desperate need for research. The research that we do have is pieced together from incomplete census data dealing with self-reporting same-sex partnered households, small, largely non-random academic samples, some advocacy and industry surveys, and growing body of anecdotal experience. What we do know is very disturbing. We know that LGBT elders lag behind their non-LGBT peers on all economic indicators. Female same-sex partnered households are twice as likely to live below the poverty line. LGBT elders are more likely to be single, to live alone, to not have children. They report greater levels of disability on all 6 points of disability queried by the census. They are more likely to be estranged from their family of origin, which means they rely on chosen family. Chosen family, as you know, is a wonderful invention of the LGBT community, where we make our friends as family. The problem is that chosen family is legally very fragile and also tends to be single generational, which means that LGBT elders are often denied the comfort of having an intergenerational support network. In the United States, 80% of all caregiving is informal, meaning unpaid. We rely very heavily on that sort of support. That means LGBT elders as a population are more likely to need supportive services, but their visceral fear of experiencing anti-LGBT bias will make them less likely to access the services they need. This leads to the potential for self-neglect and social isolation being the term of art, which means you don't have anyone to call. No one can drive you to the doctors, no one can pick up that prescription, no one can bring in something to eat. Those elders then see themselves more likely to have to get long-term care, but that kicks in again to this fear of experiencing anti-LGBT bias, which in the majority of states is not against the law. And when you think about it, as a cohort, our LGBT elders are longtime survivors of homophobia and transphobia. As a cohort, they report that they have experienced very high levels of discrimination, harassment, and violence over the course of their lifetimes. What we find is that as you grow old, and this makes perfect sense, your sense of vulnerability is amplified, such that discrimination, harassment, threats that you might have been able to navigate when you were younger can appear very menacing when you're a frail, homebound 87-year-old. Finally, I want to say couple things just about the closet really quickly. For non-LGBT folks, it's sometimes easy to underestimate both the emotional and physical toll that the closet can take. That is, daily not being able to be who you are. In fact, having to hide who you are. Some elders report that if they are forced into congregate living facilities, rather than risk anti-LGBT bias, they create an alternative set of memories, right? Try not to cry. Okay, I'm going to try not to cry. So that you have our elders making an alternative set of memories so that a same-sex partner might become a brother or a best friend. The closet makes this generation particularly silent, and in fact, it's been called Gen Silent, and that's a term that I use in an article that one of my recent articles is on the table outside. I just put it there at lunch. So if you have this profoundly silent population who are trying to hide everything about themselves, we know that it is a recipe for not just emotional issues, but also poor physical health. I have a quote from the chief geriatric psychiatrist at a large New York hospital that explains closeted elders face, quote, a faster pathway to depression, failure to thrive, and even premature death. She continues, quote, there is something special about having to hide this part of your identity at a time when your entire identity is threatened. And I want to end with a really quick story that was reported in the New York Times in 2007. Apparently, some of the types of anti-LGBT bias, and I hope the other panelists will talk about the specifics, that can encounter in long-term care facilities will include having to placate the prejudice of other residents. Because LGBT elders have to not just worry about service providers, but they have to worry about being in with a cohort that we know has the highest level of anti-LGBT feeling, right? And it makes sense. They grew up, right? Non-LGBT old people grew up at a time when homosexuality was criminalized and it was pathologized, and so it makes perfect sense. But there's a report that some long-term care facilities will move an elder who appears to be LGBT in order to placate the prejudice of other residents. And where's the best place to stash such an elder? In the dementia or memory wards. Those wards are secure. You cannot leave. And the New York Times reported in 2007 that an elderly man who was perceived to be gay was placed in a dementia ward. He was without close friends or close family, and even though he was not suffering from dementia, he was surrounded day in and day out by other residents who were. This can lead to disaster, and indeed, this gentleman hanged himself. There was nobody making a video for him, so hopefully we can start to change that now. Thank you.
I'd like to thank my colleagues from HUD for inviting me here today. I just want to tell a couple of stories to start. In 1999, I was an attorney in the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, and then the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights was Bill Land Lee, and he convened a working group on civil rights for all Americans. The goal of the working group was to use our existing civil rights law to protect the rights of members of the LGBT community. And my role in doing that was working on Title IX issues. David Bickle of the Lambda Legal Defense Fund sent the first case brought by the Department of Justice regarding same-sex peer-on-peer sexual harassment in a high school. In that case, the young man who was the victim of the harassment got more than traditional hate speech based on his sexual orientation. His peers said he didn't act like a normal boy. His peers essentially said that his gender conduct was nonconforming. And that was the real basis of our argument about gender discrimination. So flash forward to 2010. We're no longer talking about the civil rights of all Americans. We're actually talking about the civil rights of LGBT Americans. and I was fortunate enough to represent the Office for Civil Rights from HHS at a meeting convened by the Joint Commission, formerly the Joint Commission on Hospital Accreditation, regarding the services that are provided to LGBT individuals in hospitals and nursing homes. And that meeting was attended by a number of you here, especially my colleagues from SAGE, and resulted in what I think will be an important publication. The Joint Commission's publication came out this year, Advancing Effective Communication, Cultural Competence in Patient and Family-Centered Care for the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Community, a field guide. So why this publication is important is I think that from the provider's perspective, it outlines the way that hospitals and nursing homes can provide culturally competent care to the LGBT community. For those of you who are attorneys or advocates, it talks about ways that we can use our existing statutes and regulations to protect the rights of gay men and lesbians. For example, we all know that there is no federal statute that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. There's no federal statute that prohibits discrimination on the basis of gender identity. However, we can use our existing statutes, including the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, the Hill-Burton Act, Title IX, Title VI, Section 504, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. In addition, during the course of this administration, we have had several new executive orders as well as rulemakings, including the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services changes to the hospital and critical access hospital conditions of participation to ensure equal visitation, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services letters to state Medicaid directors, RE same-sex partners and medical liens, transfer of assets and estate recovery. We have had the HHS National Data Progression Plan for LGBT data, and the Office of Personnel Management has issued guidance regarding the employment of transgender individuals in the federal workplace. All of this, to me, having served for over 15 years as a federal employee, is just a watershed. It's as if the Red Sea has been parted. And specifically today, I just wanted to talk about how the HHS Office for Civil Rights enforces Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 in the nursing home context. What we have found in our office is that years ago, hospitals had to adjust to providing care and treatment to HIV-positive men. However, it's taken quite some time for the medical breakthroughs to get to the point where HIV-positive men are living to be seniors in need of skilled nursing services. The sad part of that is that nursing homes have been very slow to make the transition into providing culturally competent care. And what we have done in these cases is use Section 504 and Title II of the ADA because healthcare providers receiving federal funds and public healthcare providers are prohibited from denying treatment to otherwise qualified HIV-positive patients on the basis of their disabilities. I just want to go straight to some of our cases and talk about our partnerships with some organizations that have filed with us. And I just want to not beat around the bush about this. I think change happens when you who are advocates and attorneys trust the federal agencies enough to actually file complaints with us. AIDS Legal Counsel of Chicago did that. They filed with OCR on behalf of an individual who had been denied admission to a nursing home. The complaint alleged that the nursing home had never admitted patients with HIV, nor trained staff on how to provide services to patients. Now, after an investigation and during the course of negotiations, we got the nursing home to enter into a settlement. And the way we do that is pretty basic. It's like, do you like receiving payments from CMS? If you want to continue to do that in the future, we'd like you to have new admissions policies, new non-discrimination policies. We want your staff to be trained. We want you to learn universal precautions, and we want you to enforce HIPAA. HIPAA is just incredibly important in that we need for people to understand that it doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is or your gender identity is, your protected health information is in fact protected. And that can't be disclosed unless it's medically necessary to do so. And the other case I'd like to talk to before I close is a case that was brought to us by the Contra County HIV Legal Services Project. This is another case about a nursing home who essentially denied admission to a placement. There was no place else for him to go. He went to a board and care facility, which I think would have been horrible. In California, board and care facilities can't give HIV care. So he was in the last stages of AIDS, no IV hydration, no morphine drip. I can't imagine how horrible that was. He died 2 months later, and that was a case where we issued a violation letter of finding. And in our process, if we issue a violation letter of finding, the covered entity has either got to take corrective action, or we're going to the HHS Departmental Appeals Board to terminate federal financial assistance. In this case, the nursing home agreed to new admissions procedures, new grievance procedures, reasonable accommodations, and staff training on both HIPAA and universal precautions. We also sent them to an AIDS education and training center, which is funded by HRSA, where they actually spent weeks being trained on appropriate levels of care. So I'd just like to invite you to consider filing with us, filing with HUD, filing with the Department of Justice, because there always should be a first case. And I think given the recent new statutes and the recent new regulations that we have, that's all just waiting to be tested.
Thanks very much, Ken. I want to start by flagging a report that we did with some other organizations released earlier this year, Stories with the Field, that used surveys of LGBT elders who had experienced time in a long-term care facility, and also surveyed service providers and others, and brought up a lot of stories from the field that raised some of the issues that have been discussed earlier today about the uneasiness that folks felt in this communal situation. Some good stories too, but some difficult ones in discrimination felt from service providers or from other residents. And it's not my topic here today, but I wanted to note it, to note that it's available on the internet, and also to note that I brought a couple dozen hard copies with me and left them on the table outside the front door. So please feel free to take a copy or two and bring it home with you. My topic today is one of the legal barriers to accessing housing and long-term care, specifically the Medicaid eligibility rules. And it's particularly relevant here because marriage and the definition of marriage plays into the type of protections that are available for the spouse, for the partner. And the federal law in this case does very clearly distinguish between heterosexual couples and LGBT couples, and in a way that is detrimental to the LGBT community. Michael mentioned this in a very brief bullet this morning and pointed out that there is some improvement in this area. So, and indeed, because of that, this presentation is both pointing out a problem and flagging some improvement that's happened in the last 12 months. So the big picture message is things are not particularly good here, but they're getting better, and we can see some progress in this area that gives protection to partners that they didn't have 12 months ago. And first go back 20 plus years when there weren't any protections for married couples, period. And the problem is, of course, is that nursing facility care is extraordinarily expensive. And if a spouse is in a nursing facility and paying $4, $5, $6, $7, $8,000 a month, whatever it might be, the couple see their life savings, what they thought were their life savings, what they thought might be enough to live on for decades, all of a sudden go from healthy to rock bottom. And in the late 80s, Congress recognized this as a problem and instituted some spousal impoverishment protections so that these protections would be available across the board without the kind of estate planning that was used up to that point. To that point, what couples had to do, which is really a sad comment on the law at the time, is to separate themselves legally to a certain extent. One, the sick spouse would take his or her resources and separate his or her resources from the resources of the spouse, and then go to Medicaid and be able to say, well, look, I don't have anything, and apply on that basis. But what Medicaid wanted was a fair system that looked at the resources of the entire couple, but also recognized that the system should be set up in a way that allows the well spouse to retain a decent standard of living. So currently, under existing Medicaid law, the well spouse can keep between $20,000 and $110,000 in resources, depending on the state. Or it's more technically, it's half of the couple's resources up to 110, or somewhere between that, depending on what state you're in. And there's also some protections for income. One spouse can allocate his or her quote unquote excess income to the well spouse to bring the well spouse's income in the range of $1,800 to $2,700 a month. So the well spouse is going to have $20,000 to $100,000+ or plus in income $1,800 to $2,700 a month, which is considered enough, and not extravagant, but enough so that the spouse outside of the nursing facility is able to maintain a decent standard of living. And these protections are mandatory for nursing facility care, and they're optional for home and community-based services. So, as I think we all know, that Medicaid and the community in general is moving from nursing facility care to assisted living to long-term services and supports at home. The federal law makes these protections at the state's discretion for the home and community-based services. The vast majority of states do provide equality in this area and offer the spousal impoverishment protections in their HCBS programs. And in 2014, and for the 5 years after that, under the Affordable Care Act, it'll be mandatory for these protections to be used in HCBS settings. The problem in the LGBT community is that these protections are available for married spouses. And the Defense of Marriage Act specifically defines a married spouse as a marriage between a man and a woman. And so state Medicaid programs are unable to automatically extend these protections to LGBT couples. That was loosened up a little bit by CMS in June of this year in their issuance of a letter to state Medicaid directors, and we'll go through these provisions. The letter's actually, it's an relatively easy read, whether you're a lawyer or not, or whether you're a Medicaid specialist or not, and it's available on the internet. And the letter's very honest about acknowledging that what CMS is offering is a way to work around the legal restrictions imposed by the Defense of Marriage Act. And it addresses these issues in three ways: dealing with liens, dealing with transfers between spouses, and dealing with estate claims. And the liens and estate claims provisions are important because Medicaid technically is a loan offered to the individual. Medicaid retains the right to collect from the individual's estate after his or her death. There are protections offered to spouses, which is why, and you'll see here that the states now under this have some discretion to provide somewhat comparable protections to LGBT couples. So the liens can be imposed if it is anticipated that the nursing facility resident is not going to be able to return home. It's a way for the state Medicaid program to latch onto the property and collect against it after that person's death. And what CMS points out helpfully is that this power that's granted to the states is not mandatory. The state has the ability to impose liens on the nursing facility resident's property in this situation, but is not obligated to do so. And so a state could decide just across the board not to impose liens when there is an LGBT spouse remaining in the home. The transfer of assets penalty generally imposes a penalty against the transferor spouse for the number of months for which the given away money could have paid for nursing facility care. So if I'm in a nursing facility and I give away $100,000, CMS doesn't want me to do that and then go ahead and apply for Medicaid. And so let's say a nursing facility care costs $10,000 a month, we'll impose a 10-month penalty on me, figuring that the money I should have taken that money and applied it to nursing facility care. But the important thing to note here is that there aren't penalties for transfers between spouses. What CMS flags in its letter is that the states don't have to impose penalties if it is concluded that there would be an undue hardship based on the imposition of that penalty, and CMS suggests that states could devise and apply a policy that would, in general, find that there would be an undue hardship if the penalty were to be imposed on transfers between LGBT couples. So it gives a little bit of a free pass in this situation for the transfer to be made from one spouse to the other. And I'll just note that at least in one state, that the state has taken up CMS on this invitation. This is a law that was passed a couple months ago in California that exempts transfers of the shared residence, and also going a little bit beyond what CMS mentioned in the letter, also exempts transfers of assets or income that would have been protected under the spousal impoverishment window that I mentioned earlier, right? $18 to $110,000, and in the income 17 to 18 to 27, and then finally a state recovery that CMS notes again that states have the ability to decline to impose a penalty if there would be undue hardship. So if let's assume there's a LGBT person who's died in a nursing facility, it would you can see the extreme difficulty caused by collecting against that person's property when the spouse or partner is still living in the home, and CMS suggests that states could across the board find an undue hardship in that situation, which of course I think we can all understand why that would be an undue hardship. So again, just note that there's pluses and minuses here. We're not where we should be. There's still obviously restrictions imposed by the federal law, but kudos to CMS for recognizing the problems and taking some positive steps to ameliorate them.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's still awake. Yes, good. I'm actually going to move. Where's the clicker here? Let me see here. Okay, so I'm going to I'm going to move ahead in my proposal. Not my proposal, my presentation, because as I said this morning, a lot of this is ditto. And really what we're talking about today is we're really talking about the structural drivers that put any of us in subsidized housing. So we're talking about poverty, we're talking about racism and homophobia, transphobia, and it occurs to me as I listen to everybody's presentations and I think back on the 21 years of AIDS housing work I've done, is that if I've learned nothing else from the AIDS community, it's that activism works. I was fortunate enough to see a screening of a new documentary that's going to come out on ACT UP. And it was horrifying in many ways to see those old, clips, video clips. But what it reminded me of was what an amazing, magnificent body of work got done really in about 5 or 6 years by the treatment activists, where we went from having literally nothing to protease inhibitors, and so that activism is really what we need here. I think we all pretty much know why housing is critical. I can go on and talk about HOPWA and AIDS housing for hours. But one of the things we know now, and the National AIDS Housing Coalition has been really instrumental in inspiring researchers to look at the connections between housing, access to care, improved health outcomes, and all of those things. We've organized and held 6 national and North American housing summits. And we know that homelessness puts people exponentially at higher risk for HIV incidence, that stable housing really is critical to AIDS care, to access to care, to maintenance and care, and all of that. And so we know that already. We have 400 or 500 research articles now. You should use them when you're advocating for elder housing. They're useful because they really establish a nexus between housing and health care. And you can find them on the National AIDS Housing Coalition website. Nancy Bernstein is here, and I can give you the web address later. I also wanted to touch on the National AIDS Strategy. Recently released about a year and a half ago. It is very wonderful in many of the things that it covers. It really talks about a national strategy to reduce HIV infection, which we know housing is instrumental in. Housing is absolutely prevention. It's not only prevention for HIV, it's also prevention for other types of illness. Because when you have housing, you're healthier. It's just the way it works. Improved access to care, improved health outcomes, and reduce HIV health disparities. There are things that aren't covered by the National HIV/AIDS strategy. I'm going to tease Chris about this, particularly women's issues. But again, again, as I'm listening today, I'm thinking that we've got to be careful what we ask for. I've run AIDS housing for 21 years. We run magnificent, wonderful programs, and one of the things that I've observed the most probably is, for me personally, I'm 59, I'm becoming one of those seniors soon. I don't want to live in anybody's program. I do not want to live in anybody's program. And I would not want to live in a program where there was, and this is me, medical care on site. Bailey House, we've run housing for thousands of people over the years, and one of the things we've done intentionally is never to bring medical care into our housing, because I don't know about you, but I want my housing separate from medical care. You can case manage me, you can put me in care coordination and all of that, but when I come home at night, I want to be able to close the door. I don't want somebody knocking on my door, waking me up at 5 in the morning to take pills, taking my temperature. That's not how I want to live. And again, the other important lesson I learned in the AIDS community, it's about what we want. It's about what we want. And I also learned from the Denver principles, if those of you who know about the Denver principles, that it was clear from the very beginning that people with AIDS demanded to be at the table in any program, in any planning for resources or programs that were going to serve them. I would advocate the same. I don't want young people, quite frankly, and maybe I'm being ageist, I want elder LGBT people at that table. I want to say what I want. I want you to say what you want. I don't want to be living in I don't want to be living in a program that somebody who doesn't understand my needs is going to develop. And that's one thing, I sort of grew up in terms of advocacy in the AIDS community. I think that's one of the most important lessons that I learned. It's the people that are going to be affected that really need to tell us, we need to tell you about what we want and we don't want. And there's room for innovation. Now that I know where Chris is going to be in Florida, I'm going to go down and buy there, because I've been joking with my friends for years, let's go to Boca, right? Thousands of condo units in places like South Florida that were developed during the boom and now are sitting vacant. You could buy for like pennies practically. Utilize what's here. We don't need to build more housing. We do not need to build more housing. We need to look around and see what housing is vacant and take advantage, both as organizations and as individuals, take advantage of those opportunities. Organize 10 of your friends and go buy condos in Boca or, somewhere else in South Florida. And I'm being serious, because we have to develop the programs we want to live with. You don't want me in your nursing home, believe me. You don't want me in your assisted living. I will make your life miserable, right? And you don't want most of us, certainly that have done AIDS advocacy, in your program. You will pay not to have us there. Because we're kick-ass advocates, we know how to make change, and we will drive you insane. And so for that very reason, we all need to be very creative. I want to retire with a group of people that I can sit around and talk about the Ryan White Care Act with, that I can talk about the intricacies of the the Health Reform Act. That's what I want to do. I don't want to play bingo. I don't want to do arts and crafts. I want to be with a group of activists, and we can go into the sunset together. So I guess the lessons, and you can read the PowerPoint, but I guess the lessons that I learned in HIV and AIDS that I'm going to take with me into this next 10 or 20 years is that I want to develop the program. I want to tell you how the program needs to be developed, and I want us to be innovative. If we create the same models that are there now or were there 25 years ago, shame on us. Shame on us, because we have all pushed the envelope to even be here. We have taken, no is not an answer that we understand, right? Certainly is not an answer we understand in the AIDS community. No was meant to be, advocated against. So I hope we're innovative. I hope we push the envelope. I said to someone last year, someone who also does AIDS housing, if we can't figure out how to develop swanky elder housing and get HUD to pay for it, I mean, come on. So, also talk to the people in your community who are doing AIDS housing, who are doing other types of housing. There's lots of models up there. The lesbians at the Park Slope in Brooklyn, they've figured it out. And it's not going to be institutionalized. So I digressed from my AIDS housing presentation, but you can read the PowerPoint. My contact information, I'm sure, is somewhere. But that's really what I wanted to say today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Laurie Cook-Daniels from Forge, which we think is the first transgender organization to receive significant federal funding. We're funded in part by the Administration on Aging and the Department of Justice, and I need to say thank you for that. I am going to cover in my presentation many of the same issues that Mara covered, which indicated to me that we're on the right track, that we're thinking about what's necessary when we get Mara and I in agreement. I am also really excited to actually have not made up statistics about transgender people and transgender elders. So my PowerPoint has a lot of statistics. I won't have time to go through them all. You in the room have a copy of my PowerPoint in your packet. If you're accessing this from the webinar via the internet, the PowerPoint is on the Forge's homepage. So instead, I'm going to be emphasizing the implications of these statistics for housing providers. We have three primary statistic sources here. Two of them are new this year. The first one is Injustice at Every Turn, which was done by the National Center on Transgender Equality and NGLTF. The other one is the just newly published Aging and Health Report, which is the first federally funded study of LGBT aging. You have that in the room on your seats. And then we have some Forge unpublished data. And I noticed that Mr. Bates talked about being able to identify sisters and brothers by other mothers. And what Forge puts up on when we do PowerPoints is we add a lot of photographs of transgender people and partners in order so that people can't say, well, I don't know what trans people look like. Okay. The first thing that I want to emphasize is when we talk about the transgender community, we're talking about every sexual orientation there is. We're the letter in the LGBT that includes everybody else. And what I want to point out here on these statistics is about 25% of us, more or less, are heterosexually identified. Partnership status, we have a lot of people, particularly in the older trans population, that are married, and I believe most of these are heterosexually married people, or they're people that are in same-sex marriages where one of the partners identifies as heterosexual because that's what they were before. So the implications for this are that it's critical not to just use language that assumes that all LGBT people are gay or in same-sex couples, because when you use that language, you exclude those of us that don't identify and or don't look like we're LGBT. The partners may not identify as LGBT, so when you use even that language, you may be excluding us. There's also probably going to be a need to develop some way of addressing anti-heterosexual bias in LGBT spaces. Income issues, as Mara noted this morning, trans people have much lower income in general. We have a high rate, particularly for African American male to females, of sex work or underground economy work, which means, of course, no Social Security. Transgender people in the NCTE study were found to be about 4 times as often to have household incomes of less than $10,000 a year. We had a 32% home ownership rate compared to a 67% of the general population. This was pre-recession, so we were about half as likely to own a home. Implications, transgender people will have lower retirement incomes, many more will be unable to afford market rate housing, and we will have less home equity that can be liquidated to be moved into another long-term care housing. I have a lot of statistics on general discrimination. I want to point out the 2 bottom ones on this slide. More than 50% of transgender people have been verbally harassed or disrespected in a place of public accommodation. 90% have experienced some form of discrimination on the job. We're used to being discriminated against. This particular slide is our discrimination in terms of housing. 19% have been homeless due to being transgender. 19% have been refused a house or apartment because of prejudice. 11% have been evicted because of prejudice. The implications are that because we've had so much transgender discrimination, we may be skeptical of service providers in general and congregate settings in particular. Our violence rates are extremely high. We have seen several studies now that have found that about 50% of transgender people have survived sexual violence. And that's just the sexual violence that's not counting it's not counting hate crimes, domestic violence, the other types of violence. 41% of trans people have attempted suicide at some point in their lifetime. The new aging study that is just out found out that 48% of the transgender respondents were clinically depressed compared to 31% of the overall LGBT population. Implications. It will be critical to establish relationships with mental health providers who are, in fact, trans savvy, not just LGBT savvy. Healthcare discrimination is very high. We have a high denial of healthcare. We have a high rate of being discriminated against in healthcare. We have, even to date, legalized discrimination under health insurance policies. Implications. We may have more untreated chronic conditions. We may have higher disability rates. Intersectionality has been talked about in a couple ways today. When you start crossing transgender with racial minorities, HIV status, age issues, you start even raising risk factors even higher. Implication, be aware of cross-cutting issues and make sure you know that your potential clients are aware you understand that we come in more than one flavor. I wanted to mention a couple other useful things to know about trans elders. One is that we have extremely high military service records. This was the Caring and Aging with Pride study that you have. We had a 41% rate of military veterans compared to 26% of all LGBT, and that particular figure is higher than the general public. Implications, we may want to develop and/or advertise at Veterans Administration facilities. One thing that I want to be really explicit about is one of the differences between transgender elders and LGBT elders is that we have a lot more ways in which we can be involuntarily outed. When it comes to genital surgery, in terms of older male to females, we've only got 21% that have had genital surgery. In the NCTE study, none of the older F to Ms had had genital surgery, which means that the vast majority of us are liable to be outed with our clothes off. The other type of involuntary outing is if we have identification that does not correspond with our current name and gender identity, and that's a huge proportion of our population. The third is gossip on the part of staff and other residents. So the implications, privacy and confidentiality policies, both what's written and what's practiced, are critical. Staff need to have clear policies and trainings on how to handle discrepancies in documents and on body privacy. There's also intergroup prejudice, and the implications are that we've got to set up bias-free zone and we've got to train staff and other residents on the fact we have bias-free zones. Finally, what do trans people look for when they're deciding whether or not to use an agency? Number one issue, reputation. Number two is your intake forms. Do you recognize more than male and female? And active outreach to the trans community. There's a couple more on these slides. But the implications for you is get your forms right and then go out and do outreach. Finally, my last word is housing was the number one need in the aging, the new aging study that's just been done. That's my contact information. Gray Pride Parade is our blog on LGBT aging, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Loree. That was informative. And thank you to all the panelists. Christopher, thank you for the introductions. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm Hillary Meyer. I'm the director of the National Resource Center on LGBT Aging. And I'm going to tell you a bit about our project, which is an AOA-funded project, and then talk a little bit about the cultural competency trainings that we're offering. Okay. Some key background about the National Resource Center. We were funded in 2010 to start work, and we are on a 3-year grant. We're a project of SAGE, but we have 10 national partners doing the work with us. Those partners are PHI, the LGBT Aging Project, Openhouse, Griot Circle, Forge Transgender Aging Network, the American Society on Aging, National Council of Aging's National Institute of Senior Centers, also known as NISC, N4A, the National Association of Area Agencies on Aging, Centerlink, and Hunter College. Our core missions are we're educating the aging services organizations about the needs of LGBT elders. We're educating the LGBT organizations about the needs of our aging population. And finally, we're providing information for LGBT older adults themselves in various issues that they deal with in their daily lives. The ways that we're trying to do this, we've established a website. The address is on the PowerPoint as well as on the slides, or on the handouts in front of you, lgbtagingcenter.org. We have a training institute, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and we also provide technical assistance, so you can either call us or email us with questions. This is a screenshot from our recently launched housing resources. The way that our website is built is that we both bring together existing resources and we also create original content. Some of the original content on our housing resources are by people, not surprisingly, sitting here in this room. They've written articles and are up on our website, so I encourage you to scroll through. We talk about LGBT housing options that are available. We talk about different models of housing that are not LGBT specific. There are a number of good resources on this site. I encourage you to read through it. Let's talk about the trainings very briefly. I was really encouraged to hear a number of people earlier today talking about the various trainings that they're doing, because this really is the place where I think we need to concentrate the most right now. Somebody said earlier that the systems are in place for older adults, and now we need to get them up to speed on LGBT issues. So that's really our goal in the cultural competency training that we're providing. Our training objectives for the agencies that we train, we're trying to help people to understand the culture, needs, and concerns of LGBT older adults. We want them to consider why LGBT adults are so hesitant to access services. And then, of course, we want them to identify best practices for safety and inclusion. And we guide them through this process in the process of the training so that they really understand the need and then know the actions that they should be taking once they go back to their agencies. We have 4 trainings that we offer, 2 to the Aging Network. There's a level 1 and a level 2. And like I said, the Aging Network trainings are to get the aging services providers on board with LGBT issues. We also provide a training for LGBT organizations, and I think this is really quite remarkable, actually, because there, to my knowledge, are very few resources available to LGBT organizations to talk about ageism and how to make their services to their community accessible to older adults. It's a huge issue in our community, as many of you know. All of the levels are 4 hours, so if you do a level 1 and a level 2 training, it's an 8-hour day. It's quite comprehensive, as you might imagine. Some of the benefits of our training, it was collaboratively written, and so a number of the groups that are here, some who are not here, participated in bringing their curricula together and to create this National Resource Center training. And those groups are SAGE, the LGBT Aging Project, Openhouse, Griot Circle, the Transgender Aging Network, and Centerlink. It was also written by experts in adult-centered learning principles, an organization called PHI. So it was written by people who do this as their bread and butter. And we have an evaluation expert in Hunter College. They're able to look at we have a pre-test and a post-test and look at some of the results and evaluate whether or not we're actually getting through to service providers. And last but certainly not least, it's offered free of charge. The training right now, courtesy of the Administration on Aging, is being offered so that cost should not be a prohibitive factor. And so we're hoping that people, even with agencies who are strapped for cash, as many are, can still bring us in and we can talk to their staff and volunteers. Anybody who's interested in requesting a training, please visit our website, lgbtagingcenter.org. You can talk to me afterward about the training or about the resource center itself. I'm also going to be leaving these we did a year in review. I'll leave them outside of the room if you want to read more about the resource center. It also includes a list of all of our current National Resource Center trainers, so you can see where they are located across the country. That's it.
Please join me in giving the entire panel a round of applause. Are these things on? I think we have time for just a few questions, and you can either direct your question to a specific person on the panel, or you can open it up for anyone on the panel to respond. Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sergio Farfan. I'm from Louisiana Latino Health Coalition in New Orleans, and also I'm a member of NAC, Nationalist Housing Coalition. Something we haven't been having here today is what are we doing for the undocumented elderly Latino population? It's something that is here, they're not going anywhere, and we need to do something.
I can. Yeah, I apologize, Sergio. We had talked about it at lunch. Yeah, I mean, none of us have talked about the undocumented LGBT elderly, which is kind of the pink elephant often in many rooms. So I don't know whether we're going to be able to really come up with anything today, but I think this is a group of people. We don't know how many there are, but certainly in all of our communities, we are certainly seeing people in the HIV/AIDS community in numbers who are undocumented, who have AIDS and are now over 50 and getting older. So it will, I'm sure, become an issue even in the non-HIV/AIDS, LGBT community. So it's another group of folks that I think, have to talk about.
Thank you. Are there other questions? All right, I'd like to ask a question if I can. Can I ask this of you, Eric? Do nursing facilities have a legal obligation to be more LGBT friendly?
They do. The nursing facility, the nursing home reform law is actually very good on these issues, that facilities have a legal obligation to accommodate the individual needs of residents, and this is supposed to be put together via a assessment and care planning process, and the care planning process includes the residents and their family members and the care providers. Mm-hmm. So if a person, LGBT person, is in the facility, there's absolutely an entree in the care planning process to say, this is what I want, this is what's bothering me, this is how I want things to happen while I'm here in the nursing facility, and let's figure out how to make it happen.
Great. Questions from the audience?
I'm interested in knowing what work, if any, is being done around regulations for adult care homes. In our state, this is a real issue, and as I understand it, they have a lot more latitude around what type of regulations they're working within as far as being discriminatory, because they're having people in their own homes and with their own families. And I'm just wondering if anybody could speak to anything that you're aware of that's being done on those lines.
I can take a shot at this and just make the general observation that once you get beyond nursing facilities, you're talking about assisted living, adult foster care, adult care homes, whatever they happen to be called in your particular state. The feds don't really have much to say about it. It's all state regulation, and the state regulation tends to be relatively sketchy because providers are given a great deal of discretion, and that's just true for a whole variety of issues, which is not to say that we just need to walk away and assume that there's nothing to be done, but recognize that there's a great deal to be done. A lot of it needs to be done at the state level. There's our organization and others have formed an Assisted Living Consumer Alliance to try to focus more interest on these issues, but it's a little bit of a blank spot as far as oversight is concerned, both with substantive standards and enforcement as well. The CMS has taken a little bit of a notice now. There is increasing federal money going to assisted living residential care through HCBS waivers, and there's in a couple limited areas, there's some indication that CMS intends to look a little bit stricter at what's actually being done in these facilities, but we're still at the very initial stages.
Yeah, and I would close with saying that Gina put the charge to us that we have to be our own advocates, that we have to talk about how do we want to live as seniors, and we want to spend our retiring years, and we have to be talking to those who provide this housing, both at the federal level and at the state level, to make sure that we're included completely as people and that we're not marginalized, we're not forced to go in the closet, and we're not forced to give up what we fought so hard for over the last 50 years. It would be a shame to have that happen to any individual in our community. And yours will be the last question, sir.
It's really a comment.
Please.
I understand Regina's point, and it's well taken. But I'm a real estate developer. The reason I'm here today is I'm interested in developing housing for people in the LGBT community who cannot afford to get their own housing in Boca. That's why I came here. And I think others are here for that reason. People who are making $10,000 a year, I don't know how they live, much less have housing. But that's the need that we have to address here. And I really give credit to the people who put this together for being a wonderful beginning. It is only a beginning. The government is going to have to step up and come up with the bucks, because you can't provide housing for people in those very low income levels without government participation, without government stimulation, without government policy making that focuses on making it happen. There are a lot of us out there who have the expertise, certainly the programmatic expertise on how to help the people in the housing already exists in this room, but without government taking a proactive, very strong position here, and not just the legal parts of it, which are certainly very important, but it's going to have to be money put into it and focused on the LGBT community, not out there, and maybe the LGBT community can get a piece of the pie if they scramble hard enough. That's not going to work, because the LGBT community that we're talking about will disappear by the time government gets there if it takes its normal pace of getting to solve the problem. I used to be in government, so I'm not criticizing anybody else. So that's the point I wanted to make. We need government to get very proactive on this issue.
Quick. And then yours is the last word.
I get
no
the
more
last,
words.
always. First of all, I've done low-income housing my entire adult life, so I just want to put that out there. There's money out there, and I think, we're talking about the elderly poor. Hundreds of thousands of people in this country, probably millions and millions, not just LGBT poor. There is money out there. And I keep challenging folks, look at what's around, look at what's available. Let's not reinvent the wheel. We can't keep building new housing. And I'm the last one to take no for an answer, but in this economy, you try to approach HUD, for instance, and ask for a whole new pot of money targeted to LGBT, ain't gonna happen. And that's why we learn to be innovative in the HIV/AIDS community. And, we have to figure out how to be innovative here too.
Great. A last round of applause for the panel, please. Thank you all. Thank you. No, you were terrific. Great opening.
thank our panelists from our last panel, and now we're getting ready to move right into our next panel on funding barriers and financing options, and then we'll have a break after the next panel. But for now, since we have a webcast, we're going to keep it moving. I'm going to pass it on to my partner in putting this all together, Greg Case, who will be moderating the next panel. Thanks.
Okay, as she said, my name is Greg Case, and I'm with the U.S. Administration on Aging. Our session is Funding Barriers and Financing Options for LGBT Elder Housing. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and I'll have them motion in the order they're going to speak, which is not the order they are here. First, we have Seth Kilborn from Openhouse in San Francisco. Then we have, second speaker will be Mark Siegel with the DMH Fund, William Wade Senior Residences, and finally Sheila Moore with Gay and Lesbian Elder Housing in Los Angeles. But before we get started, and we're not doing bios, if you'd like to learn more about them, I invite you to talk to them afterwards. Before we get started, we did want to spend a little time to find out if you have anything in particular that you hope to learn from this session today. So if there's something that you really want to hear them discuss, an issue that you want in particular to be brought up, we'd like to hear about it now. And we invite you to, sorry to catch you off guard, I can see y'all looking at me like, oh God, we have to think real quick here before they even talk. What's the topic again? It's funding barriers and financing options. So, yes ma'am, please.
I think I'd just like, especially for you to speak to collaborative relationships that you have both with mainstream organizations and LGBT organizations. Thank you.
Good, good. Anybody else got some burning issue that they hope is touched this afternoon? Please.
You know, I know we can't discriminate based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So how do you get money and how do you put together something for LGBT folks only?
Okay. Okay, we got another one coming over here. Don't have to run, it's all right.
Hi, just beyond HUD 202 and beyond low-income housing tax credits, what other ways are you thinking about financing senior housing properties for low-income individuals?
Okay. Okay, I think that's it then. With no further ado, then I will ask Seth Kilborn with Openhouse to come up.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate HUD and AOA working to put on this wonderful conference. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in San Francisco and the project that Openhouse is working on, and I am going to try to hit on the three issues that were mentioned here about collaboration, which has been a big focus of our work over the last 10 or 12 years, as well as the challenge of focusing our work on LGBT population vis-a-vis the larger population. Which one of these do I hit here? Let's try that again. So I think we've all seen this slide probably 3 times today, so I won't go over it in detail. I want to point out, though, because it will get to a point that I want to make later in my presentation about the annual Social Security income for older gay couples. You'll notice that translates to about $1,000 or $1,100 per month, which when I get to the financing challenges at the end of my presentation, I want you to remember those numbers, because what's considered an affordable housing unit in San Francisco is not so affordable when you're talking about incomes that are that low. I wanted to just briefly talk a little bit about what Openhouse does, because I think part of our housing project and part of the financing challenges that we face, I think relate to what we do overall as an organization. We are a housing sponsoring agency, but we also provide services and community programs to 25,000 seniors, LGBT seniors who live in San Francisco, and we also do training and technical assistance. And just in terms of what we do around housing, we are currently building 109 units of low-income subsidized housing at 55 Laguna Street, which is the site of the former University of California campus in San Francisco. It's a wonderful location, and I'll talk a little bit more detail about that in a second. We are currently now working and assisting LGBT seniors who are in need of housing today. As I'm sure it is true in most cities in the country, you know, affordable housing in San Francisco is awarded by a lottery process, and so therefore the community really needs to be very well organized in terms of making sure that their names, their applications, their paperwork is all in order when they go to apply for those housing lotteries. Part of our mission is really to get LGBT seniors better represented in the existing senior housing in San Francisco, which is a very difficult and time-consuming process. We've actually found that, you know, rejection being such an important psychological issue for LGBT seniors, they apply for a lottery once, they get they don't get selected, not because of any discrimination necessarily, and then, you know, they don't apply again. And we need to make sure that they are well represented within that process. And a big part of what I want to make sure you walk away with today is that our model of housing is very much based on the combination of housing with on-site and accessible services. Somebody asked earlier about assisted living and other kinds of housing. You know, our goal at Openhouse is to build, you know, 109 units of housing, which will be for independent living, and we want people to be able to move in and stay there for the rest of their lives. Now, some of those folks are not, that's not going to be possible. They're going to need to move into an assisted living facility, but we want to make sure that we have enough either direct on-site services or enough contracts with other agencies to make sure that those people who move into 55 Laguna Street in 3 or 4 years can stay there for as long as possible, and hopefully not have to move again. We do provide a very extensive services and community building program. Right now we sort of run a senior center but without walls. We work with our local LGBT community center to put on a lot of these programs. We work with senior centers across San Francisco to put on a lot of these programs. I won't go into great detail here other than to say it's our goal to bring this services and community program that's pretty extensive that we've been building over the last few years at Openhouse, bring that to the 55 Laguna facility when we do get it built. So we envision that our housing and our social services and our activities will sort of, they'll have a hub that we will create that will include affordable housing and include all of the other work that we do, both for the residents to take advantage of, but also for the larger LGBT community. Our vision is very much to have support and social services on site for the residents, but also make our building and make our housing very interactive. We want the community to feel welcomed there. And we do provide training and technical assistance, and I'll put in a plug for the National Technical Assistance Resource Center. It's really an amazing program. One of our staff is one of the trainers who's actually doing a training today in Contra Costa County for the National Technical Assistance Resource Center, and I would highly recommend taking a look at the website and their training program. So now I want to talk more specifically about our housing at 55 Laguna Street. Basic artist rendering of what we hope our building will eventually look like. We're not quite there yet. We're getting started on the specific design and engineering work, but as I said, our goal is to create a community. Really briefly, I just thought it was important to talk a little bit about the history of this project to emphasize how long it takes to develop any kind of project if you're thinking about embarking on such a task in your city. You know, we got founded in 1998 as an organization. We got started, in earnest, earlier in in 2002, we did a very large community-based study. It took us 6 years to finally find a site that would actually work. We had a lot of fits and starts, projects and sites that we thought would work and then fell through for one reason or another. You have to be very patient and very persistent about such a strategy. We did a market analysis of the housing needs for the LGBT community. We spent a lot of years, my point being, making our case that we needed LGBT welcoming housing in San Francisco, and did the research to back that up. So fast forward, to the last few years. In 2008, the city of San Francisco agreed to finance Openhouse's building. We had actually originally started off, I should have said, with a market rate project. We were actually going to build an assisted living facility, but we ended up, I won't go into all the details, building low-income housing and subsidized housing, subsidized in part by the city of San Francisco. So this was back in 2008 when, right before the economy went, exploded. And they agreed to finance and help us support the low-income subsidized housing that we were building. The city did approve a rather large development, and I want to emphasize, I want to mention this here, both in terms of collaboration and in terms of challenges. Our development is actually, one piece of a very large development. The larger part of the development is actually a private market rate, rental project, not just for seniors, but for anybody who would like to live there. There'll be 330 units of those multi-family market rate rentals that are going to be developed as part of the project. Our piece will be 109 units of senior affordable housing. So we're combining, two projects kind of into one that the city of San Francisco, has entitled as one big project. So there's many different players involved, which creates a lot of complications and a lot of financing challenges because we're working with a private developer who's developing their market rate piece, and then we're working on senior affordable on our piece, but we kind of have to go through the city approval process all together because it's sort of entitled as one project, which makes things very complicated. But from 2008 to 2010, housing development basically stopped in San Francisco as the economy collapsed. The city all of a sudden ran out of money and said, well, sorry, we don't have any money to fund your senior affordable housing. The market rate developer, the original one, filed for Chapter 11 because they they made a few questionable decisions and were not able to finance the market rate project. So when the market rate project, tanked, so did our project because we were together and we were entitled together and approved together by the city of San Francisco. So it took us a few years to really get the project back on track. But speaking of collaboration, we decided in 2011 when the city came back to us and said, okay, let's try to revive this project. There was a new market rate developer that came on board to build the market rate part of the project, so the whole thing kind of got revived just in 2011. We made a decision to partner with Mercy Housing California, which is a very large developer of specializing in affordable housing, but especially senior housing in California. They have an excellent reputation. We took a lot of time, though, to really look at who we did want to collaborate with in terms of building this affordable housing. There was a few options in San Francisco, as I'm sure there are in your communities. And, we went and we sat down and we talked with, the principals at each and every one of those organizations to make sure that, our values, our desire to build LGBT welcoming housing, our desire to make sure that services were on site, we sort of had a whole list of questions that we needed to ask them before agreeing to collaborate. We finally did settle on Mercy Housing, and it took us, 3 or 4 months to hammer out, a partnership agreement to make sure that we very much understood what it was that we wanted to achieve with this project. But they bring enormous expertise in terms of developing affordable housing, which I think it has become a very key component now of moving this project along rather quickly now that it has been revived. So the model at 55 Laguna Street, as I said, 109 units. Actually, it's going to be a mix of some studios, mostly one-bedroom units. Affordable up to 50% of the area median income in San Francisco. So everybody who lives there can't make more than about $45,000 a year as a single person. We're actually going to be building 2 buildings. One will be funded by 4% and 9% tax credits and local housing dollars, and the other, we hope, will be a HUD 202 finance building. And I think, as I'm going to get to in just a second in terms of the challenges, HUD 202 is a very, very competitive process, obviously. Only 1 or 2 awards in San Francisco are made every year. We're hoping to get one of those when the time comes in the next few years. But that, of course, is heavily subsidized, and so one only pays 30% of your income, no matter how much your income is, in terms of rent. For the tax credit building and the one that will be subsidized with city dollars, that subsidy, that deep level of subsidy doesn't exist. And I'm going to get to the challenges in just a second around that, but I wanted to make sure that we made that distinction. Mercy Housing California and Openhouse will co-own and co-operate this building. Don't need to go into all the details here, but again, if you're thinking about collaborating with another agency or another developer, really, really important to make sure that you hammer out the agreements about who's going to be doing what, who's going to be managing the building, who's going to be recruiting to fill the building, who's going to be providing the services. It's a very important relationship to structure. We will also include in our building about 10,000 square feet of community center and service space, which will include the Openhouse offices. So as I said, it's our intention to move our whole service program to this new building and create a new space. In addition to the LGBT community center, which we currently use, we wanted to build, a very efficient senior-focused space. It will include a dining room, and it will include a kitchen, and it will include an activities room, et cetera, that's really focused on LGBT, or focused on seniors. So let's talk really briefly. I have another couple slides about the challenges. Okay, so I've already talked a little bit about the lack of local funding. The economy completely tanked. Nobody was building anything in San Francisco. The Mayor's Office of Housing, which is our agency that provides the local funding for affordable housing, they get their money from the fees that the private developers pay. They have to pay a certain percentage into this affordable housing fund. Well, if there's no private development going on, there's no money coming into the affordable housing fund. So for the last 3 years, that fund literally has not grown by a dime, because nothing has been developed in San Francisco. That's now beginning to change. People are coming back into the market. The economy is getting better in terms of these private investments. So those dollars are now coming in. But we had to make, and I know Mark's going to talk about this in a minute, sort of about the politics of how you make this all work. We had to fight very, very hard to make sure that the city of San Francisco, having committed to us way back in 2008 that they would fund this project, still to prioritize our work. Because obviously in the last 3 years, no affordable housing really, or very little, has gone forward in San Francisco because of the economy. So we had to fight pretty hard, and all of that advocacy we did for 5 or 10 years before we got approval from the city of San Francisco proved, very, very, very important to exercise. When the choices came about which projects to prioritize, we were successful in getting ours put to the top of the list. We'll be dealing with an historic resource, which has a huge complication in terms of the financing. The site that we are actually developing is on the historic register, so we are actually going to be having to go through a very extensive process that HUD will ultimately approve. It's called we need to get NEPA clearance, which stands for the National Environmental Policy Act, so we have to go through an entire assessment of all the historic resources on the site, how we're going to be changing them, why we're going to be changing them, and sort of defend that. That's going to take us probably about a year to do. We'll need to combine, the traditional, tax credit, HUD 202 funding, along with other kinds of funding for the Openhouse offices and our activity center, because we can't use the HUD 202 money to build an activity center. That comes from, the community development block grants and other sources of funding. So putting all of those pieces together is going to be very challenging, and obviously the money is, CDBG's got cut, okay, I'm getting to the end. This is really the last thing. This is the last thing I want to say, which I think is really important in terms of the relatively high rents that we would need to charge for our tax credit financed building. If we don't get HUD 202 funding and we have to build all of our buildings with tax credits, you'll see here, right now, San Francisco will allow you, this is all based on somebody who makes about $45,000 or $50,000 a year, which is the 50% AMI limit. So the maximum rents that San Francisco will allow you to charge are about 30% of somebody's income. But the vast majority of people that Openhouse serves makes far below this amount of money. And so in order for us really to serve the people that we need to serve, we must and we will heavily rely on that HUD 202 subsidy in order to make it work. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to, we'll fill the units, but we won't be filling the units with people that are the most in need. And that's, I think, our biggest funding challenge as we figure out, based on the income of rents and the subsidies that we're going to get, how we're going to actually finance and make the building operate. Okay, I'll stop there. Sorry.
I'm Mark Sigel from the DHM Fund in Philadelphia, and we are here to make you dream. We're here to make you dream. It can be done. You've been hearing all day today that there's a need for senior housing. I'm not going to tell you that there's a need. We all know that. There's a need for LGBT senior housing. A need. And it can be done. And the funds are out there. There are two magical words in the English language. And I want you to know these two words very importantly, because you hear them often and you don't realize how it affects you. The words are, magic words, economic development. You've all heard that a long time, right? You hear it all the time when the mayor is building a hotel, a swimming pool, a community center. You hear it's a city economic development project. Well, guess what? Each and every one of you in your cities is an economic development project. LGBT senior affordable and non-affordable housing is an economic development. You will be giving 100 to 200 people construction jobs while you're building. Carpenters, electricians, plumbers. After that, you will have people employed to manage the building, both social services and the building itself. This is economic development. Now, how do you get to economic development? In our case, it was by being conventional. Philadelphia has been fighting for equality, and this is what we're here talking about today, equality. Equality for LGBT seniors, and no longer being invisible. We've been fighting in Philadelphia for LGBT equality since the first marches for gay rights outside Independence Hall in 1965. Philadelphians are so used to LGBT issues that 2 weeks ago, our city council passed an LGBT inclusive contracts bill for city contracting agencies unanimously and with not one opposition voice from any citizen of Philadelphia. It's pretty good. Philadelphians are used to the idea of LGBT. So we've worked for the last 35 years on working with our political structure and getting the support for whatever our community needs. We have a health center. We have a youth center. We have a community center. We have churches. That's what the gay rights movement's about, building community. And this is the new frontier. You're all the pioneers of this new frontier. Every one of you in this room. You have to break the barriers. And what we've tried to do is break the barriers politically. And the way we're doing that is by being conventional. We decided equality is the word to go and the way we're going. And we're going to build our home, hopefully, in the same way Catholic Charities does, in the same way Jewish Federation does, and in the same way Presbyterian Homes does their affordable home. Okay. Here we are. Our development cost for our project for 56 units is $19 million. There will be 56 one-bedroom units in a brand new 6-story structure. 10% of the units will be fully accessible. Additional units will fit for accommodate the needs of the hearing or visually impaired. Early seed money. Again, being politically connected in your community. Our governor 2 years ago gave us a grant, community development grant, those magic words, we love those words, for $500,000. That $500,000 was meant to seed this project, work with youth, seniors, and HIV in the LGBT community. Meaning that we were able to go out to all the organizations in our community and create partnerships and say, we want you to be involved in our project, which in return, if we're able to get them involved with our project by giving them funds, get you support from your entire community. In fact, there is not an organization in Philadelphia that is not supportive of our function and our building at this point. The City of Philadelphia, thanks to the Mayor of Philadelphia and thanks to the Office of Housing, has given us a $2 million grant for our current project. We have that now already basically in the bank. The state of Pennsylvania has given us an RCAP grant of $6 million. Again, politically connected. Each state gives out money in different ways. In Pennsylvania, the state legislature and Senate give out funds each year for major capital projects. It has to be approved. You can either get it approved by the House, you can get it approved by the Senate, or you can get it approved by the governor. We were a little greedy. We went to the House, we went to the Senate, and we went to the governor. And I can tell you now that just 2 months ago, our current governor signed off on our $6 million RCAP. We now have $8 million. Our last step is to get $11 million in private equity raised through the sale of low-income tax credits. Okay, so we got the 500. That 500,000, aside from seeding our community organization, also paid for our attorneys, our consultants, to get us everything we've needed. Those consultants put together all the studies we needed, environmental, where it should be located, so on and so forth. And I'm not going to go through all that for you, especially because he's going to tap the table very shortly. Okay, let's see. You've done that already. You've been through that. Okay, Penrose. Seth made a very important point. Every project like this needs to have a commercial development partner. Extremely important. They bring several things to you. Number one, the most important thing they bring to you is expertise. We chose Penrose Development because Penrose Development is the largest developer of affordable senior housing in Pennsylvania. They, right at this moment, manage over 11,000 units. That's very large. They've been doing it for 40 years. Their reputation is stellar. They bring upon them the expertise to fill out all the documentation, to do all the funding for all the bureaucrats in state government. Our funding, we're now before the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Committee for the final piece of our funding. That's $11 million. That's the final piece, and we're in. That piece, that filing is like the old Yellow Pages. Does anybody remember Yellow Pages? It's that thick. Well, they bring the expertise to do that. They put that together. Yeah. They will also manage our building since they manage 11 million other. We have gone through that. And if you're wondering why I'm so passionate about this issue and why I'm here today, I hope, something special to this field. I realize how historic this meeting is. You see, it was 42 years ago in 1969 that I was a member of Gay Liberation Front New York. 42 years ago. And many of our members today, and we keep together with an email tree, are those people needing housing. And that's the first generation of the gay liberation movement. My brothers and sisters need housing. So what I say to you today is, build it. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you, Seth and Mark, and thank you, Greg. I just have a few statements before I start. First, I want to say how exciting it is to be part of the LGBT aging movement and how really inspirational it is to be here and hear the good works as well as the challenges. It's really inspirational. And how really honored I am to be counted among such passionate and caring and distinguished leaders in the LGBT community. So it's really my pleasure to be here. And I'm very proud. I'm very proud of Triangle Square. I'm proud of the work. You hear Seth and you hear Mark and some of the other Hope and some of the other folks who are here and Joy, people that this is all our stories. You know, it is a dream, and it takes passion and vision and creativity and, of course, money to make these things happen. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit. What I'd like to do is I'm going to try not to like buzz through my presentation, but what I want to do is talk a little bit about sustainability. Because that is our story, that was our story, it will be the story that for the next few buildings, for all of us that have this dream. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what happens every day, about how we sustain this, about how it's about management and social services, about it when it's about services that are both housing and business, and social services, which is about retention of seniors living as long as they can, aging in place, and how it's about making sure a building works and a building stays operable, which is kind of the bottom line. If you asked me 20 years ago as a social work student if I'd be up here talking about how budgets really impact and about retention is about people staying and these are the things, I would say, oh no, you just have to make sure that they're cared for. But it's all about, when we're doing this thing, it's about, I guess it's about brick and mortar, and it's also about heart and soul. And I think that, I hope that that's how Triangle Square will be remembered and will kind of how it started and how it will continue. So let me see. Okay. So let me talk. Whoa, I don't know what I did. What do I do now? Oh, does somebody else have control? Yeah. Thank you. I felt several like that in my life these last couple of weeks. I also want to say that if you have heard rumors that Mark Supper, our executive director, did resign, he has indeed resigned. He went to Los Angeles Youth Network. It's a significant loss for Triangle Square and gay and lesbian elder housing. It's also what we're trying to look at as an opportunity, a great opportunity to continue the good work that he started. So if I squint a lot, it's because I'm still on that learning curve. Okay, did I do it right? Okay, forward. Okay, thank you. So I just want to talk a little bit about our history because it's important. And here we are in Washington, D.C., and it kind of begs to talk a little bit about history. So in the year 2000, really, gay and lesbian elder housing was the outgrowth of what the Alliance for the Diverse Aging Community Services. At the time, California Governor Gray Davis kind of put out the word and an initiative with some money behind it for kind of the general mainstream aging community to look at seniors, how they're cared for in terms of long-term care. What are the options to skilled nursing facilities? If there are options outside of skilled nursing facilities, what are those services, how we can support, how can we identify? And through a grant that was given to the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center, it was a $90,000 grant, this alliance got together and began to try to figure out what it was that the LGBT elders at that time needed. And in 2001, when the grant was about to expire and was expiring, and there really wasn't the capacity and the resources to continue that work, Gay and Lesbian Elder Housing was formed on December 2001, December 26th. It was formed to deal with the lack of diverse, supportive living communities for LGBT older adults. So in 2002 to 2005, there was more market research done, kind of trying to figure out what are the needs, continuing on with what was started in 2001. In 2005, we secured a for-profit housing developer to partner with Gay and Lesbian Elder Housing. There was land acquisition, architectural construction company, and we applied for and secured funding sources and political support, like both Mark and Seth were talking about. These are all the kind of the players that are involved, not to mention the $1.5 million private funding. So this was all, I consider it blood, sweat, and tears. This is what went into creating this brick and mortar building that sits at the corner of Selma and Ivar in Hollywood. I also want to say that what's really important is that it's not only about what you know, but who you know. And I have to tell you that I would be extremely remiss if I didn't thank Assistant Secretary Mercedes Marquez for her work. Triangle Square is a direct result of her passion and her concern and her investment and involvement. So forever it will go down, probably as well, we actually call it Mercedes, but probably Mercedes Place, because she was absolutely instrumental. So between 2005 and 2007, there was groundbreaking, the building construction, we did community outreach, and you talked about how do you build for LGBT elders, and how do you do that? I think the question was how do you do that, right, within fair housing, right? LGBT friendly, right? And I think it's how you do your outreach. It's how you do and you can all correct me. It's how you do your outreach. I think that you can't. Laurie brought up the anti-heterosexual bias. And I have to say, in our building, and I wish I had tons of time because I talked to you about that, what goes on and how our seniors fear what that means now that they have. Our building is 90% LGBT. And they are so afraid that it's going to be taken over. And I think that's a real fear, and it's something that we need to talk about, but maybe another time. So in 2006, we put out pre-applications. In 2007, there was full applications. 2007, June, the first residents moved in, and our first resident was a transgender female. And December 2007, the final unit was leased. And in 2008 to 2010, we have been developing our comprehensive housing care program, which is a senior services piece, which is a services model that goes along with the housing. So here's Triangle Square today. It's a beautiful building. I guess it's a swanky place for LGBT elders to age. And so here's a little bit about it's a 5-story complex. You can read it with 5 stories. We have 104 units. Our development partners are McCormick Barron Salazar, McCormick Barron Reagan Management Services. These are our continued funders and the people that we rely on. It always takes a village. The building has 104 units. 35 units have set aside for HIV, AIDS, homeless, and/or risk of being homeless. 36% of our residents are living with HIV, AIDS. 99% occupancy since 2007, and like I said, we have 90% LGBT occupancy. Average age is 75. Most of our residents are at or living below poverty, which is really very staggering. 85% of the residents are living with at least one chronic health condition. We've lost about 10% of our residents to death, and 32% of the residents have HUD vouchers. And what makes it if we talk about sustainability, the HUD vouchers actually belong to the residents. So if the residents decide to move out of our building, there goes that lovely HUD, that voucher. And so it becomes, I think, critical when you think about sustainability, what that might mean for your facility or your building. So the 2 areas of service delivery, really, I like to look at it as both as housing and services. They go hand in hand. And I want to talk a little bit about program model because, not to belabor comprehensive housing care, but because we talk about keeping the LGBT residents in Triangle Square in a safe environment. It's about retention, like I talked about. Our model is client-focused, so we do economic case management, we do aging in place, and we do health and wellness. But it's really key, we're talking about sustainability. It's about residents staying at home, in their home, their independent home, as long as possible, and it's about the building and keeping the building going as long as possible. So it becomes kind of we become interdependent upon one another. And I'm going to blow through my example of Anne, but it's what people have been talking about. She was a 75-year-old woman, lost her partner of 45, lesbian, lost her partner of 45 years, spent most of her nest egg on the care of her partner, was at risk for homelessness, extremely low income after she lost the partner's income, couldn't stay. She had limited support network, multiple health problems, not to mention the depression, anxiety, and caregiver fatigue that she experienced after the death of her partner. And so this was kind of, it takes a village, because this person actually called SAGE, who called the Gay and Lesbian Center, who made connection with us. And actually, Anne and her partner had been on our waiting list, so we were able to provide housing for Anne. We have also been working on getting, and she received a Section 8 voucher. I do economic case management with her to keep her financially viable so she can stay without too much stress. Living independently, and some of the services that she gets from us and with the Gay and Lesbian Center and other community partners like Lisa's Place down at Olympia Medical Center, or mental health services, social activity, and she's an awesome, awesome community activist, and so I invite any of you who need stories to contact me, because Anne will do it. So what were some of the obstacles? Well, you know, Mark would say, and sorry, he's not like dead or anything, he's just down the street from us, but Mark would say that what's really key is maintaining a developer mindset, that this is about business. This is about building affordable housing. Like, so you kind of almost have to put social services on the side for a moment and just focus on being a developer. You have to understand and identify the target population, their socioeconomic considerations. Know that if you do affordable housing, the people are you're going to be housing people who are in poverty. And that means a lot, not only for your building and how you're going to sustain it, but also for how you're going to sustain the folks that are going to be drawn and will be housed in your project. Is there a consumer demand for how do you strike a balance between your desired mission and adhering to fair housing laws? And I have to say that we are a mission-driven organization. from the developer to the managing to the social service. It's all about the residents and keeping them there. And at the same time, keeping them there means keeping the building afloat. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges, and I don't know, Greg, how much time do I have? Like 2 minutes? About 2 minutes. The three organizations that are really, what key is that the housing developer, the managing general partner, and the social service provider. And here is where we talk about sustainability. And I think this is where it all kind of, it all kind of comes together. That when I'm the director of social services now, kind of interim executive director. But when Mark was there, we kind of saw it as a triad between the manager, the social services, and the owner of the building. So oftentimes, as those of you in social services know, that many of our clients will come to us with one very specific thing, and it's really one specific issue, the presenting problem. It's really just the tip of the iceberg. So too goes it in housing. When you're sitting in a manager's office and somebody's not making their rent, somebody's not passing their inspections, somebody is getting locked out for like the 10th time, there's something going on. And so what we have this kind of beautiful kind of way that we work is that the management lets us know, because although we're social services there and we provide services, it's not mandatory that you take advantage of our services. You could live completely independently, never see me, never see an intern, and live happily ever after. And then I have my frequent flyers who come down all the time, and then we have those in the middle who come as they need. So management often is the first one who might see some of these things going on, who lets us know that there's something happening and gives us a referral so that we can go and try and figure out what's happening so that we can keep these folks there at home as long as possible. So when someone's late on their rent, they may not always, everybody needs to close their ears, they may not always get that eviction notice or that 3-day pay or quit or that warning right away. They may actually get a call from Sheila or a visit from Sheila to find out what's going on and how can we help and what's going on. So the opportunity, so that the idea that when many seniors who are frail, and I sometimes say frailing in place, as they're aging in place, and they don't have that safety net, well, they have us right there. So if something's happening, we can go in right away and find out what's happening. If someone's collecting too many items and their apartment is getting overextended with the things that they might have, and they're not passing. So we talked about the collaborations. We collaborate with everyone. In terms of funding, we had to, and now we do. We collaborate with the Gay and Lesbian Center. We collaborate with Adult Protective Services. We collaborate with Section 8, we collaborate with ALPHA, all with the idea that our residents stay with us as long as possible. And I want to say that it's twofold. It's one, and I don't want to seem heartless when I say it's important that it's for the building that we are able to maintain occupancy and continue sustainability for the building. But most critical is for the residents. And when you talk about the LGBT elders and you talk about our folks in poverty, what really needs to be brought home today is that when you have some income, you have freedoms, and you can buy services. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but with our residents, when we have exhausted in-home supportive services and we've exhausted the community who can be those friends who are helping to support them, they do not have the luxury of going into assisted living. It's a whole different jump. So keeping them at home and being creative as possible becomes critical beyond imagination, and I know you all know what I'm talking about. So that's what I say in closing, that this, Mark said it right, this is a dream, and it can become a reality with the same kind of tenacity and passion that our elders took to the streets, like you talked about advocacy, and this is their legacy, that they leave us to do the same for them, and in place it'll be us doing it for ourselves. So thanks.
So we do have 10 minutes for questions. Step to the microphone.
We have one question that came in via email. Yes.
Somebody is watching out there.
I think all the panelists can comment on this, but the question is, in each of the developments that you described, how will you or do you ensure that only the LGBT population is served? Will there be a preference for them to float to the top of a waiting list? And if so, if the project is subsidized by HUD 202 money, will HUD allow for this preference?
Well, the answer is, I think, for all of our projects, and maybe we'll all have a comment. I mean, our projects will be open to everyone. We will not be able to discriminate, nor should we discriminate, based on sexual orientation or gender identity. So any senior that meets the age and income requirements will be eligible to live in our building. It is a matter for us, as I sort of alluded to briefly in my presentation, for the LGBT community, it's really important that we are very well organized around sort of affordable housing in general, but when it comes to the Openhouse building, I really want to make sure that they're very well organized, so when the applications are done, they will be, right there at the LGBT center or wherever we're going to be giving out the applications to fill them out so that we can make sure that the LGBT population is well represented in the lottery. But the short answer is we won't discriminate, can't discriminate, and shouldn't discriminate. It's a matter of making sure that our folks are well organized to get into the building when the time comes.
I actually have our role model from the Jewish Federation of Philadelphia. As you all know, there are Jewish homes, there are Catholic homes, there are Presbyterian homes. The term for our home is LGBT friendly, and that's a term that HUD now accepts, so that's really important, LGBT friendly. Now, when people come and visit the home, you get to show them various things. So what our friends at the Jewish Federation did was they made sure that the opening visiting day were Fridays and Saturdays. And they took them and showed them how the members of the home went to temple on Friday and went to temple on Saturday. And then they had a Jewish cooking class. Then basically, you show them that the home is primarily for LGBT activities, and usually the only people who are going to live in your house are those who are LGBT and those who are LGBT allies. And we want our allies. Why shouldn't they be with us? But we got part of that example from Sheila's Sheila's Triangle Square, and they are the expert. They're the only ones opening, and by the way, I forgot to mention this during our presentation. We're now before PHFA, which is Pennsylvania Home Finance, for our tax credits, which is the last portion of our funding. The answer on that will be this April, and if we get our tax credits in April, we will do groundbreaking in 13 months, 1 month from next month.
Yeah, no, I guess maybe ditto is the appropriate, but yeah, I mean, we comply completely with fair housing laws, so we can't discriminate at all. And so, like I said, it's about outreach and how visible you are and making sure that you're visible in the community, in our community, and let them know what's out there so that you can, when you're taking applications, it's heavily, it's our community that's coming and responding. Yep. And so it's how you do your outreach and where you do your outreach, really, because we can't discriminate.
Relationships with advanced care facilities so that when somebody can no longer live independently and they have to go into something like a nursing home, they don't have to go back into the closet at that point?
Yeah, I mean, in the Los Angeles area, we have some of the skilled nursing facilities who are actually kind of seeking us out. And very interested in providing affirming environment for our residents. And I have to say that, like when I say it's a mission-driven, that when you're once part of Triangle Square community, you're kind of always a part of. So there are many members of our community who are in, not many, okay, that's an overstatement. There have been folks who have gone to skilled nursing, and I make sure that I visit them, so that if there's any issues, so that I can be the advocate. So kind of like a surrogate family member, so that I can be there, and I can be there at the treatment care meetings, and we can talk about the kinds of issues that they have. And yeah, so I guess that was a long answer to say, yeah, yes, we do. We do have relationships.
I
know just in general, we all know our communities, and we all know what skilled nursing facilities are, that we would be okay with ourselves, and places that wouldn't, and just in general, that's what I'm looking at first. Bottom line, how will they be cared for as a patient, and then also how are they going to be cared for as a member of the LGBT community?
And I was just going to say, from Openhouse perspective, I mean, it takes so long to develop anything in San Francisco. We've taken advantage of that time by developing really good relationships with a lot of different providers, so that when we do build our building, we'll be prepared for that very eventuality, in addition to a multitude of other eventualities that will happen, so that we make sure that we have the relationships and we've already pre-identified the LGBT-friendly services that we can then refer people to. We do that all the time. We serve, 300 or 400 seniors a year, referring them often because they call us to ask, what is LGBT friendly? Where can I find housing, this service, social services, sometimes assisted living? So I think, to piggyback on what Sheila's saying, whether you do it before you build your building or during it or after, it's really important to have all of those relationships in place, because you're never going to be able to do it all. And I loved what Sheila just said about, once you're part of the community, you're always part of the community. We say that about Openhouse too. You become part of Openhouse and you're a part of Openhouse for the rest of your life. And we want to follow you wherever that may take you, including hopefully to, the Openhouse building, or if that doesn't happen, to, living independently, to living in an assisted living facility. But working those relationships and developing that network takes a long time, and you should start like yesterday to make sure that that's all in place.
We believe that what we're doing is pioneering and breaking barriers. So in our city, we saw that we had an opportunity to encompass all of the senior organizations that currently operate in the 5-county Philadelphia area. Not just LGBT organizations, but all organizations. In fact, we have one of our partners with us now, Larry Feltzer, from the senior law practice in Philadelphia. We also, to incorporate through the day, we've had various members of staff from our congressional delegation have been here. And I think Christina is here now from Senator Casey's office. As you said, keep your political friends close to you. Well, they've been here all day today, and I believe our mayor is watching this webcast right now. Thank you, Mayor Nat'l. But as I thank you, we've been building that support system, and the mayor, once I turned 60 years old, was kind enough to appoint me to the Philadelphia Commission on Aging, so I'm now officially old. Being officially old, what that commission does is it works with every single organization in Philadelphia delivering and giving senior care. And therefore, we are now implementing into each and every organization an LGBT structure. Outside of that, DMH Fund got all these organizations together, and they are, as a group, supporting this project because, very simply, there is no LGBT senior housing in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. This will be a first.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question.
Hi, this is Kathleen Sullivan from Los Angeles, and this might mostly be a question for Sheila because she has the experience on site, but we in our program have a lot of age variation, and so there are a lot of different experiences that our seniors have, and I'm just wondering, from a housing perspective and from sort of, as someone ages, maybe reduced functionality, are there different challenges that you see and you face at Triangle Square based on the different ages of the residents?
Good question. Just let me think for a second, because the first thing that popped into my mind was what I like to say, and what I hope that the service that we deliver is that when you are homebound at Triangle Square is much different than if you were homebound in the community. That you're homebound in your apartment, but most of us know about it, and other residents are there. So I guess the diversity of need is certainly there. Is someone who is aging in place and having more and more acute episodes from the chronic diseases that they might have. The rest of the community, those who aren't so challenged by their health situation, are coming to their aid. So I guess if you want to say that for some of them, we're coordinating their care and trying to do kind of like the share the care model and creating a community around them to get them to doctors and get them to surgery. Some were talking about how to get a new car because that's their main way of transportation, or helping them deal with going from their being independent in their car to taking the metro and getting on the bus, and what that means in terms of loss and challenge, to losing friends. So there's a gamut. There's absolutely, you're right, that it may not necessarily be on age, but actually it may be related to a certain person's health status rather than age. Because we have somebody who's in his 80s who will take anybody anywhere in terms of a doctor's visit or then some. And we have folks who are in their late 60s, mid-60s, who are probably much frailer than he is. And so it's about identifying, I guess, need in the community versus age, and then also being able to craft community and to, I'll say, capitalize on the care that the community has for one another. And I'll tell you, my residents would not say, they'd say, oh, we don't have community. They'd be like, no, there's not community there, Triangle Square. Do you see that multi-purpose room? There's only 5 people coming for some of those classes. But you know what? I'll tell you, the way that community is when someone needs to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and be taken to the doctors. There's usually somebody there, you know? Either there's somebody there because one of the residents has offered, or somebody's there because we've talked and we've worked with them. So to me, that's and I think it kind of, they see it, but in just little drips and drabs. It's kind of hard. But yeah, no. Thanks, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much.